As the dry desert wind poked about the shorts and shirts of the competitors over in the flag race, my stomach started making strange, loud noises. I was glad I was out of the sun and appreciated what relief the tin shed could provide. I felt like I needed to do it too. But whenever I sat on the loo, the only thing that would come out was a noise that sounded like those fireworks that keep low to the ground, go off in numbers, and kind of go whew, 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 whew. I must have tried to go about 16 times. I was actually in there when Mr. Serini came to get me for the 200. "Are you all right in there, champ?" he inquired, tapping lightly on the door. Champ? I thought that tag was reserved for Darren, beaten by 15 metres Bignell. "I won't be a minute, sir," I heaved, as I tried one last time to exercise the demon in my bowel. But to no avail. The only thing I succeeded in forcing was another battery of fireworks noises, and a little blood to Mr. Sereni's blushing face. As Paraburdoo District High School was a civilised place, the girls ran before the boys, which meant I had time to size up the opposition and see how far 200 metres really was. And it was a long, long way. Not only was it 4 swimming pools, half of it was around a corner. I was looking down at my feet and wondering if they would start spinning again, when I chanced upon the most delicious, sweet-smelling scent. Surely God himself had harvested the tears of angels, infused them with bush honey, and called it Impulse Wild Gypsy Rose. The rapturous vapours were still tickling the passages in my nose when I looked up and saw the most gorgeous girl I'd ever seen in my life. She had yellow hair, tan skin, white baby teeth, and a sparkle that could light a bushfire. Her name was Veronica Crystal. She was wearing a little blue skirt and a gold t-shirt that stretched across the emerging bumps on her chest. Oh, why couldn't she be in green? I thought. I went to speak, but my stomach got in first. "You've got a really noisy stomach, don't you?" she commented with the breath of an angel. Well, actually, it smelled a little bit like peanut butter sandwiches and brown bread, but peanut butter was my favourite. "Yeah, I'm a bit nervous," I said, shocked that I could speak so easily. "Don't be silly. I saw both your races today. You're faster than all of these guys," she said, as she walked over to the starting line. "What grade are you in?" I gushed, desperate to know if I had a chance. "Year 8, she replied, just before the starter slapped his hands, and she was off. If I'm honest, her style wasn't all that pretty, and at halfway I didn't think she could win. But then all the other girls started to get tired and slow down. But she kept going at exactly the same pace she had started at, and by the end's blanket finish, she managed to get her gold shirt across first and win by the narrowest of protruding bumps. My mind was on a seesaw. I was so happy for her and so sad for me. Year 8. She wouldn't be interested in me. But she'd seen all my races, and she'd see this one. I had to win. And as I got into my starting lean, I was half convinced that I could. Until I noticed Troy Barkler, Trevor's brother, lined up next to me. He was the fastest kid in the whole school, and the toughest. Even if I could beat him, I wouldn't want to, because he'd probably beat me up for doing it. But I couldn't help myself. That sweet smell was still racing around my body, and I had to try if I was going to have any chance with Veronica. The starter told us to get on our marks, and just as he went to clap, my stomach spasmed, and I let out an enormous fart that sounded like a camel that had just been branded. It came out with so much force that the other competitors looked around to see if there was anything behind them, and it took all my strength to stop myself from being rocketed forward into a false start. The starter told us to stand up. And then, on your marks. The start was pretty even, but within 3 strides, the orchestra in my shorts started up again, and every step I took was accompanied by a huge, slushy cacophony of gas. I wondered if I did win, would I be disqualified for jet propulsion? As I rounded the bend, my rectal trumpet heralded my imminent arrival. My legs didn't seem too bothered though, as they started to spin faster and I moved up on Troy Barkler. At halfway, I could hardly believe it. I was level with him, and my biggest problem was containing wind, not running like it. Troy glanced over with a "don't even think about it" look on his face as he started to pull away a little. I was so tempted to just sit in there and pick up a second. But something about his look typified my feelings about Paraburdoo, its brutal inhabitants, and the bucketing I used to get before people discovered I could play sport and I became half popular. And I thought, you can stick it up your bum, Troy Barkler. I'm gonna beat ya. And with that, I really tried to open up and mow him down. But something was wrong. Something was blocking me. I tensed up really hard and moved a little closer, but I knew I could go faster. So I squeezed every muscle I had harder than the designer had ever anticipated. What resulted was simultaneously the most triumphant and embarrassing moment of my life. My enormous muscular contraction did see me almost double my speed, surge forward, win by metres, and collect the title of fastest runner in the entire school at the tender age of 8. But it also saw my underpants undertake a role that they were never really intended for. Shit catching. As I crossed the line, I must have looked like a lawnmower with a filled to overflowing catcher on the back. Needless to say, my 200 metres turned into 340 metres, as I wasn't going to stop until I was safely locked behind the cubicle door in the tin shed. The only issue being, the door didn't actually lock, so I had to lean against it as I frantically tried to come up with a solution. And so absorbed I must have been in plotting the disposal of the shit catcher that I didn't realise I was leaning too hard on the door, subsequently losing my balance and falling head first into Mr. Sereni's knee-length socks.
"You little bloody ripper, Briggsy!"
he bellowed as he picked me up and hoisted me over his shoulder. I thought this was pretty weird, because he should have seen the stain on my shorts, and then suddenly I realised why he hadn't. Ever since I could remember, well, as far back as kindy, my friends had always worn flimsy French-style jockette underpants, whereas I had always worn big, white English Y-fronts. Dad had often joked that they were bulletproof, and it looked like he was right. I knew every second was precious. "Oh, actually, Mr. Sereni, I'm feeling a bit sick. I think you'd better put me down," I said, feigning dizziness. "Oh, that's no good, champ. What's wrong?" he asked. Once back on the ground, I made a beeline for the cubicle. I'm going to throw up. Do you think you could mind the door, please, sir?" "Of course, Stephen. Are you sure you're all right? Do you need any help?" said a concerned Mr. Sereni as he held the door shut. "No, I'll be fine. It's just all the excitement and too many sweets," I claimed as I removed my shorts and checked them for stainage. Those jockey Y-fronts were incredible. The shorts didn't have a mark on them. They didn't smell too crisp, but they had survived the rigours of a slippery sprint without so much as a dot. I wish the same could have been said for the inside of the jockeys. It would have probably been a good idea to start dry retching at that point, to make it more convincing for Mr. Sereni, but I didn't have to pretend, because as I pulled the elastic aside and peered down to assess the damage, my insides wrenched like a hose that had just been turned on full bore and wasn't attached to a sprinkler. Somehow, possibly via now the very faint smell of Veronica Crystal and my desire to be crowned king of the 200 next to her queen, I managed to fight through my throttling convulsions and delicately remove the offending Y-fronts without spilling any of their cargo. And after some gentle manoeuvring toward the bowl, I let out a huge vomiting noise to cover the sound of the diarrhea tumbling into the water. Then all I had to do was take the jockey's clean outer side, wipe the remaining sludge from my legs and bottom, and flush everything down the S-bend. Which I did. Well, at least most of it. I didn't know the Y-fronts would block everything up. As I stood on the box and took in the cheers of the crowd, the warmed wind swirled through my shorts and blew away any remaining odour. A guy from soccer called Max Warren came third, so he got his medal first. Then Troy Barkler got his, and finally, I was presented with mine. I've got to say, it felt pretty good up there. And it must have showed, because 5 minutes later they asked me up there again to get the junior boy trophy. And this time, I wasn't alone. This time, I had to stand next to Veronica Crystal. In fact, the junior, intermediate and senior boy and girl champion all had to stand on the 3 boxes at once. I was supposed to stand next to the junior girl winner, but as the local paper photographer went to click her button, I jumped up next to Veronica, and she held me against her so I wouldn't fall off. Funny thing happened on those boxes. As the photographer changed film, we all clung on to each other and the loose pyramid we were forming. But the senior girl, whose name I can't remember, sneezed, and the senior boy, who incidentally was Troy Barkler, got such a fright that he fell off the podium and took the rest of us with him. And that's when the strange thing happened. I was closest to the ground, so I fell first. Then Veronica fell right on top of me, and then the senior girl fell on top of her. It could have just been because I wasn't wearing underpants, but for some reason, Veronica lying on top of me made me feel funny. It made me throb somewhere I'd never throbbed before. And although it was scary, it was also kind of fun. I could have laid there inhaling her sweet smell and feeling her protruding bumps on my chest for hours. And I probably would have if the photographer hadn't managed to reload the camera and ask us to get back on the boxes, which we did. And then Veronica and I, standing so close it was almost rude, were immortalised on the front page of the Parabadoo Times. And just when it seemed that our fairy tale reign as king and queen of the 200 would never end, a black Monaro with tinted windows and a GTS stripe locked up its brakes and skidded to a halt in front of us. An old man, who I thought must be Veronica's dad, stepped out. He had a 3-day growth as black as his muscle shirt and matching footy shorts. And he said nothing. He just pointed at the passenger seat. Veronica hopped into the car and everybody had to duck for cover as the Monaro sprayed dust and gravel all over us. In my haste to be next to Veronica, I'd almost forgotten what I'd just accomplished. And after a few minutes staring at the Monaro's impression of a vanishing black dot, I grabbed my bike and burned home to tell Kimber what I'd done and celebrate with him. The backyard was strangely quiet as I made my way up to the ghost gum, a swag of medallions clinking in my hand. I'd expected the usual flock of deafening sulphur-crested cockatoos getting high off the eucalyptus leaves, but for the first time in months, they were somewhere else.